What happens when Hollywood royalty meets reality television's most unfiltered host? You won't believe what unfolds when Meghan Markle sits down with Andy Cohen, and what started as a simple conversation turns into television's most shocking meltdown of the year. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're not going to believe what unfolds. Last night's episode of Watch What Happens Live promised to be just another celebrity appearance, but what viewers witnessed was nothing short of explosive. The tension in the clubhouse was palpable from the moment Meghan Markle walked onto the set, her perfectly rehearsed smile not quite reaching her eyes, as she settled into the guest chair across from Andy Cohen. "Welcome to the clubhouse, Meghan," Andy began with his signature grin, already sensing something electric in the air. "Thanks for finally making it on the show. I know we've been trying to get you here for quite some time." Meghan's laugh came out sharper than intended. "Well, you know how it is, Andy. Some invitations are worth waiting for, and others, well, let's just say timing is everything." The audience laughed nervously, unsure if they'd just witnessed a playful jab or the first shot fired in what would become an all-out war. Andy's eyebrows raised slightly, his media-trained instincts immediately picking up on the subtle hostility behind her words. "Right, well, let's dive right in then," Andy continued, shuffling through his blue cards with practiced ease. "You've been making headlines lately with your various business ventures and philanthropic efforts. Tell us about your latest project with your lifestyle brand." "Actually, Andy, before we get into that," Meghan interrupted, her voice taking on a tone that made the studio audience shift uncomfortably in their seats. "I think we should address the elephant in the room. You've made some rather interesting comments about me and my husband over the years on your various platforms." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Andy's smile faltered for just a millisecond before his professional mask slipped back into place. "I'm not sure what you're referring to, Meghan. I've always been supportive of you and Harry." "Supportive?" Meghan's voice rose slightly, her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. "Is that what you call it? When you spend entire segments of your radio show dissecting my every move? When you have guests on who make snide remarks about my authenticity, and you just laugh along?" The camera operators exchanged glances, sensing they were capturing something unprecedented. Andy leaned back in his chair, his journalist instincts kicking in even as the situation spiraled beyond typical celebrity interview territory. "Meghan, I think you might be misremembering some things," Andy said carefully, his voice maintaining its professional cadence despite the growing tension. "My job is to facilitate conversations about pop culture, and unfortunately, that sometimes includes discussing public figures and the choices they make." "The choices we make?" Meghan's eyes flashed dangerously. "You mean like choosing to step back from royal duties to protect our family's mental health? Or choosing to speak our truth about the racism we experienced? Those choices?" The studio fell silent except for the low hum of cameras continuing to roll. Andy realized he was sitting across from someone who had clearly been harboring resentment for months, if not years, and had chosen this moment to unleash it on live television. "I think we're getting a bit off track here," Andy attempted to redirect, but Meghan was far from finished. "No, Andy, I think we're exactly on track. You see, I came here tonight because I wanted to have an honest conversation with someone who has made a career out of commenting on my life without ever actually knowing me or understanding what we've been through." The audience could feel the electricity crackling between host and guest as Andy's famous composure began to show its first real cracks. His usually quick wit seemed momentarily stunned into silence as Meghan continued her unexpected assault. "You want to talk about my business ventures? Fine. Let's talk about how every single project I announce gets torn apart on your show before it's even launched. Let's talk about how you give platform after platform to people who question my motives, my authenticity, my right to speak about my own experiences." Andy's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Meghan, with all due respect, when you enter the public eye at the level you have, especially when you marry into the British royal family, you have to expect a certain level of scrutiny and commentary. That's just how media works. Just how media works," Meghan repeated, her voice dripping with disdain. "Is that your justification for perpetuating harmful narratives? For giving credence to conspiracy theories about my pregnancy? For laughing along when your guests make jokes about my race? The accusation hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Andy's face went from surprised to defensive in an instant, his media training warring with his natural instinct to fight back against what he clearly saw as an unfair characterization of his work. "Now hold on just a minute," Andy said, his voice taking on an edge that longtime viewers had rarely heard. "I have never, and I mean never, tolerated racist commentary on any of my platforms. If you have specific examples of what you're talking about, I'd like to hear them, because that's a very serious accusation you're making." But Meghan was just getting started, and the storm that was about to break would make this opening salvo look like gentle rainfall. The audience watched in stunned silence as Meghan's perfectly manicured facade completely shattered before their eyes. She leaned forward in her chair, her voice taking on a razor-sharp edge that cut through the studio atmosphere like a knife. "You want specific examples, Andy? Let's start with last month when you had that royal correspondent on your radio show who suggested that my children might not actually be mine." You laughed, Andy. You actually laughed when she implied that I used a surrogate and lied about it to the public. Andy's face went white. "That is absolutely not what happened, and you know it. We were discussing surrogate pregnancies in general, and I never endorsed any conspiracy theories about your pregnancies." "Oh, but you didn't shut it down either, did you?" Meghan's voice was now trembling with rage. "You let it hang there in the air, while millions of your listeners absorbed those toxic lies. Do you have any idea what that does to a mother? What it feels like to have strangers questioning whether your children are actually yours?" The camera zoomed in on Andy's face, capturing every micro-expression as he struggled to maintain control of his own show. His usual confident demeanor was cracking under the relentless assault, and for the first time in his career, he appeared genuinely rattled. "Meghan, I think you're taking things out of context and—" "Context?" Meghan exploded, her voice echoing through the studio with such force that several audience members visibly jumped. "The context is that you've built an empire on tearing people down, on feeding your audience gossip and speculation disguised as entertainment. The context is that you've never once used your platform to actually defend me when your guests cross lines that should never be crossed." Andy's jaw clenched visibly, his media training warring with his natural instinct to defend himself. "Now you're being completely unfair. I've had plenty of guests who have spoken positively about you and Harry. I've never deliberately—" "Deliberately?" Meghan cut him off with a bitter laugh. "That's the problem, Andy. You don't have to be deliberate about it. Your negligence, your willingness to let harmful narratives flourish on your platforms, does the job just fine." The temperature in the studio had reached a boiling point. Production assistants were frantically signaling from the wings, unsure whether they should cut to commercial or let this train wreck continue to unfold in real time. "You know what really gets me?" Meghan continued, her voice now dripping with contempt. "You position yourself as this progressive voice, this LGBTQ+ advocate, someone who understands what it's like to be marginalized. But when it comes to a woman of color trying to navigate an impossible situation with grace, suddenly your empathy runs dry." Andy's composure finally snapped. "That is completely out of line, and you know it. My track record speaks for itself when it comes to supporting marginalized communities. I don't need lectures from someone who— What, Andy?" Meghan's eyes blazed as she interrupted him mid-sentence. "Someone who married a prince and thought she could change an institution from the inside? Someone naive enough to believe that doing good work and following the rules would be enough? Is that what you were going to say? Someone who seems to think that everyone else is the problem?" Andy shot back, his voice rising to match hers. "You've burned bridges with family members, former friends, staff members, and now apparently me, all while positioning yourself as the victim in every single scenario." The accusation hit like a thunderbolt. The studio audience gasped audibly, and even the camera operators paused their work for a split second, realizing they were witnessing television history in the making. Meghan's face went through a series of expressions: shock, hurt, and then pure fury. When she spoke again, her voice was dangerously quiet. "Did you just accuse me of being a professional victim, Andy? On live television? In front of millions of viewers?" Andy realized he had crossed a line, but his pride wouldn't let him back down now. "I'm saying that maybe, just maybe, if everyone around you keeps disappointing you, The problem might not be with everyone else. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Meghan stood up so abruptly that her chair nearly toppled backward. Her hands were shaking with rage as she looked down at Andy, who remained seated but was clearly bracing for whatever came next. "You have no idea what you're talking about," Meghan said, her voice barely above a whisper but somehow more terrifying than when she had been shouting. "You sit in your little clubhouse, surrounded by sycophants and yes-men, playing with your blue cards and thinking you understand the world. But you don't understand anything about sacrifice, or loyalty, or what it means to stand up for what's right when everyone is telling you to just smile and be grateful." Andy stood up as well, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "And you think throwing tantrums on national television is standing up for what's right? This is exactly the kind of behavior that—" But before he could finish his sentence, Meghan had already reached the point of no return, and what happened next would be replayed on social media for years to come. "Throwing tantrums?" Meghan's voice cut through the studio like a blade, her entire body trembling with fury. "Throwing tantrums? You think speaking truth to power is a tantrum? You think calling out your toxic behavior is childish?" She stepped closer to Andy's desk, her eyes blazing with an intensity that made everyone in the studio hold their breath. "Let me tell you what a tantrum looks like, Andy. A tantrum is what you're having right now, because for once, someone isn't playing along with your little game. For once, someone is holding you accountable for the damage your platform causes." Andy's face was now bright red, his carefully cultivated media persona completely abandoned. "My platform? My platform? You came on my show, in my studio, and you're lecturing me about accountability? You want to talk about damage? Let's talk about how you've systematically destroyed every relationship you've ever had in the public eye." "Enough!" Meghan screamed, her voice echoing through the studio with such force that several audience members covered their ears. "I am done listening to privileged men tell me how I should react to racism, how I should handle harassment, how I should smile and nod while people attack my family." She grabbed her purse from beside her chair and swung it over her shoulder with such violence that her microphone pack nearly flew off. "You know what, Andy? You're right about one thing. I do burn bridges, but only the ones that lead nowhere good." Andy, now standing behind his desk as if it were a barrier protecting him from her fury, pointed an accusatory finger at her. "This is exactly why nobody wants to work with you anymore. This right here. You can't handle any criticism, any pushback, without turning into—" "Without turning into what, Andy?" Meghan challenged, taking another step toward him. "Say it. Finish that sentence. Without turning into what?" The studio fell deadly silent. Andy's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, realizing he had been about to say something that would have ended his career instantly. The unspoken words hung in the air between them, and everyone present understood the gravity of the moment. "That's what I thought," Meghan said with deadly calm. "You were about to show everyone exactly who you really are underneath all that fake Hollywood charm. But you caught yourself, didn't you? Because deep down, you know I'm right about everything I've said tonight." She turned toward the camera, addressing the viewing audience directly while completely ignoring Andy. "To everyone watching at home, this is what it looks like when someone who has spent years profiting off of other people's pain finally gets confronted. This is what happens when the comfortable status quo gets challenged." Andy found his voice again, his professional instincts kicking in as he tried desperately to regain control of his show. "Meghan, I think we should take a commercial break and try to—" "There's no coming back from this, Andy," Meghan interrupted, her voice now eerily composed after the storm of emotions. "You've shown your true colors tonight, and so have I. The difference is, I can live with mine." She began walking toward the exit, her heels clicking against the floor with military precision. The camera followed her movement as the audience sat in stunned silence, unsure whether to applaud or remain quiet. "You can't just walk off my set," Andy called after her, his voice cracking slightly with desperation. "We're live! You can't just leave in the middle of an interview." Meghan stopped at the edge of the set and turned back one final time. Her smile was cold and calculated, nothing like the warm expression she had worn when she first entered the studio hours earlier. "Watch me," she said simply. And with that, she disappeared behind the cameras and into the wings, leaving Andy standing alone at his desk, his mouth agape, staring at the empty chair where his guest had been sitting just moments before. The studio remained silent for what felt like an eternity. Andy looked helplessly at his production team, who were frantically signaling from behind the cameras about what to do next. His blue cards lay scattered across his desk, completely useless now that his carefully planned interview had imploded spectacularly. "Well," Andy finally managed to say, his voice hoarse from shouting, "I guess that's a wrap for tonight's show." He looked directly into the camera, his usual confidence completely shattered. "We'll be right back with, we'll be right back." The cameras finally cut to black, but the damage had been done. In the span of one explosive confrontation, two public figures had laid bare their animosities, their prejudices, and their true feelings about each other in front of millions of viewers. As the studio lights dimmed and the audience filed out in shocked whispers, Andy slumped into his chair, realizing that this wasn't just the end of an interview, it was possibly the end of his reputation as the king of celebrity conversations. Meanwhile, somewhere in the building, Meghan Markle was already in her car, driving into the night, leaving behind a television moment that would be dissected, analyzed, and replayed for years to come. She had come to Andy's show with a purpose, and she had accomplished exactly what she set out to do. She had exposed what she saw as the rot at the heart of celebrity media culture, even if it meant burning every bridge in Hollywood to do it. The confrontation was over, but the aftermath was just beginning.